Laughter echoed through the crystalline chambers of the Galactic Council, a sound that would haunt them in the cycles to come. On the holographic display before them, Earth's defensive fleet looked absurdly small, mere pinpricks of light against the vast darkness of space. Dr. Chen stood motionless at the center of the chamber, her weathered face betraying no emotion as the council members continued their mockery. At 68, she was considered young by their standards, though the silver streaks in her black hair suggested otherwise to human eyes. "Surely this is a joke," Supreme Counselor ZYX 427 warbled, their bioluminescent tendrils pulsing with amusement. "You mean to tell us that this handful of ships, is humanity's contribution to the combined defense forces?" "Yes, Counselor," Dr. Chen replied simply, her quiet voice somehow filling the vast chamber. "This is exactly what humanity has chosen to present." Another wave of laughter rippled through the assembly. The Ergoxians clutched their carapaces in mirth, while the crystalline Petrovi vibrated at frequencies of pure entertainment. Only Ambassador Reln of the Verdant Collective remained silent, their compound eyes studying Dr. Chen with unsettling intensity. They had fought humans before, in the brief but brutal First Contact War. They, alone among the council, noticed the slight curve at the corner of Dr. Chen's mouth, not quite a smile, but something adjacent to it. "Very well," ZYX 427 declared, "if Earth insists on this token contribution, so be it. But know that when the darkness comes, your people cannot expect." The chamber plunged into absolute darkness. When the lights returned 3 seconds later, Dr. Chen stood in the exact same position, but now a small device pulsed in her hand. The Council's security forces had their weapons drawn, but they seemed frozen, uncertain. 3 seconds, Dr. Chen said softly. In 3 seconds, humanity's token force could have disabled every defense system in this facility. "The darkness you fear, Counselor? It's already here. We've been tracking it for months while you debated procedural matters." She placed the device on the central platform, where it projected a new hologram, vast waves of something that consumed light itself, spreading across the galaxy like a cancer. "You laugh at our small fleet because you don't understand. Humanity didn't survive its own dark ages, 2 world wars, and a near-nuclear apocalypse by being stupid. We learned to be underestimated. To be overlooked." Dr. Chen's eyes met those of Ambassador Reln, and now she did smile, a gesture that sent chills through the assembly. "The ships you see aren't our defense force. They're bait." 6 months earlier, the discovery that changed everything sat on Dr. Chen's desk, its obsidian surface reflecting nothing. The artifact was smaller than a coffee mug, yet it had cost 17 lives to retrieve it from the depths of the Pacific Ocean. As she studied it for the 100th time, the quantum scanner's readouts remained the same. The object was 4 billion years old, predating Earth itself. And it was counting down. "The council representatives have arrived, Dr. Chen." Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "They're expressing impatience." "Let them," she murmured, though she was already rising from her desk. Age had made her joints stiff, but there was no time for weakness. Not now. The delegation waited in the Antarctic Research Facility's conference room, their environmental suits humming as they adjusted to Earth's atmosphere. Dr. Chen recognized the species present, 2 Ergoxians, their insectoid form sleek and dangerous, a Petrovi crystalline entity, its facets refracting the harsh fluorescent light, and of course, Ambassador Reln of the Verdant Collective, their compound eyes tracking her every movement. "This had better be important," the senior Ergoxian clicked. "The Council doesn't appreciate being summoned by developing species." Dr. Chen placed the artifact on the conference table. 3 weeks ago, this object began broadcasting a signal. "We've decoded it." She activated the holographic display, showing a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy. Red dots began appearing at its edges, spreading like a virus. "This is a warning. Something is coming." The Petrovi's crystalline surface vibrated. Many species discover ancient artifacts. Most are simple records or lost technology. Your interpretation is presumptuous. 17 people died getting this. Dr. Chen's voice carried an edge now. They died because the artifact actively resisted retrieval. It's not just a record, it's alive. And it's afraid. Ambassador Reln moved closer to the artifact. Afraid of what? The hologram shifted, showing a massive wave of darkness moving through space. We call them void dancers. The artifact contains records of their last appearance, 4 billion years ago. They consumed a third of the galaxy before they were stopped. Preposterous, the Urgoxian scoffed. Such an event would be in our historical records. Unless, Ambassador Reln's voice was quiet, those records were erased. Like the missing sections in our oldest archives. The gaps we could never explain. The room temperature seemed to drop. Dr. Chen nodded slowly. The artifact doesn't just warn about them. It shows how they were defeated. But we need the Council's help. Earth's resources alone aren't enough to. This meeting is over, the senior Urgoxian interrupted. We will not waste the Council's time with fairy tales and primitive interpretations of ancient technology. The artifact will be confiscated and studied by qualified experts. You can't, Dr. Chen started, but the Urgoxian was already reaching for the artifact. A blinding flash filled the room. When vision returned, the artifact sat unchanged, but the Urgoxian's mechanical grabber had been reduced to molecular ash. That, Dr. Chen said into the stunned silence, was its gentlest warning. The next one will be fatal. The artifact chose Earth for a reason. It's been waiting, dormant, for a species that could understand its message. And what message is that? Ambassador Reln asked. Dr. Chen's hand hovered over the artifact's surface. That survival sometimes requires surrender. The civilization that created this, they didn't beat the void dancers with superior firepower. They won by making themselves appear weak. By becoming bait. The artifact pulsed once, casting their shadows on the wall, shadows that moved wrong, that stretched and twisted in impossible ways. You have 6 months, Dr. Chen told the silent delegation. 6 months before they reach the outer colonies. Whatever you decide to do with this information, humanity will be ready. We've been preparing for extinction-level events since we first looked up at the stars and realized we were not alone. She didn't add what they all heard in her voice, that humanity's preparation might not be enough. That the galaxy's only hope might lie in its most powerful civilizations learning to listen to its youngest. The Petrovi colony of New Diamond fell first. One moment, the crystalline world glittered at the edge of charted space, the next, darkness swallowed its light like a closing fist. 40 million souls, gone in an instant. In the Council's emergency session, the recorded final transmission played on loop, the sound of crystal beings singing their death song, their frequencies shifting to impossible notes as something consumed them from the inside out. Dr. Chen stood at her usual place in the chamber, but now no one laughed. The holographic displays showed dozens of worlds going dark, their beacons winking out one by one like dying stars. The evacuation ships are ready, she said into the horrified silence. Earth has prepared refugee centers for up to 3 billion displaced individuals. We request immediate authorization to begin. Absolutely not. Supreme Counselor ZYX 427's tendrils writhed in agitation. This is clearly an orchestrated attack. For all we know, humanity could be behind. 47 minutes, Dr. Chen cut in, her voice sharp as a blade. That's how long you've been debating while 3 more worlds went dark. The void dancers don't care about your procedures or your suspicions. They're coming, and they're coming faster than even we predicted. Ambassador Reln rose from their seat, compound eyes reflecting the emergency lights. The human speaks truth. I have confirmed their evacuation preparations myself. The facilities exist. The ships are ready. While we debated, they acted. Without authorization, an Ergoxian representative chittered. This is a direct violation of. The chamber's lights flickered, and for a moment, everyone fell silent, remembering Dr. Chen's demonstration months ago. But this time, the darkness felt hungry. The ships are already moving, Dr. Chen said quietly. I wasn't asking for authorization. I was extending a courtesy by informing you. The first wave of evacuees will reach Earth in 3 days. Chaos erupted in the chamber. Security forces moved forward, weapons raised. But Ambassador Reln stepped between them and Dr. Chen. My people remember, they said, their translator struggling with the emotion in their voice. We remember what we tried to forget. The gaps in our history, they were self-inflicted. After the last time the darkness came, our ancestors chose to forget rather than live with the memory. Dr. Chen nodded slowly. The artifact showed us. Your people were among the last to fall in the previous cycle. You didn't forget out of shame. You forgot out of mercy. The chamber's displays suddenly blazed with new data, detailed scans of the Void Dancer's advance. The images showed not ships or beings, but tears in space itself, moving with terrible purpose. They're not invading, Dr. Chen continued, her aged hands steady as she manipulated the display. They're harvesting. Each civilization they consume makes them stronger, adds to their collective consciousness. But they have a pattern. They target the strongest first, the most technologically advanced. The ones who pose the greatest threat. Understanding dawned in Ambassador Reln's compound eyes. That's why your fleet is so small. You're making yourselves appear weak. Unworthy of immediate attention. Partly, Dr. Chen smiled, but it held no warmth. We're also positioning ourselves to shepherd as many to safety as we can. Humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our weapons. It's our experience with disaster, our protocols for mass evacuation, our ability to act quickly while larger powers debate. The displays showed new data, hundreds of small ships, moving fast and quiet through the darkness between stars, plucking survivors from worlds in the Void Dancer's path. You can arrest me for violating council law, Dr. Chen told the silent chamber. But first, ask yourselves this, when the darkness comes for your worlds, and it will come, do you want your people to die in compliance with regulations, or live in violation of them? No one moved to stop her as she walked out of the chamber. Behind her, the council erupted into fresh argument, but now there was a desperate edge to their voices. They had finally begun to understand what humanity had known all along. The true enemy wasn't the darkness between the stars. It was the darkness of pride that kept them from seeing it coming. The refugee ships arrived in waves, filling Earth's skies with the desperate and displaced. Humanity's greatest construction project in history, vast underground arcologies built in secret over decades, opened their doors to the survivors of 17 different species. In her temporary office beneath the Rocky Mountains, Dr. Chen watched the latest casualty report scroll across her screen. The numbers had become abstract, too vast for the human mind to truly comprehend. But it was the smaller number that haunted her, 37 human ships lost in the evacuation efforts, their crews sacrificing everything to save others. The door chimed. Ambassador Reln is here, her assistant announced. The Verdant entered, their normally iridescent exoskeleton dulled with exhaustion. The Council has discovered something. Something that changes everything. Show me. The hologram Reln projected showed a familiar sight, the Void Dancer's approach. But now there was something new, patterns in their movement, deliberate gaps in their advance. They're being guided, Dr. Chen breathed, the truth hitting her like a physical blow. This isn't a natural migration. Someone's controlling them. Yes. Reln's translator crackled with distortion. We found the signal source. It's coming from within the Council itself. The lights flickered, not from power failure, but from the quantum transmission suddenly flooding every screen in the facility. Supreme Counselor ZYX-427's familiar form appeared, their bioluminescent tendrils pulsing with triumph rather than their usual disdain. "Greetings, primitive ones," they said, using the formal address that had been banned centuries ago. "You see now the futility of resistance. The Void Dancers are not our enemy, they are our salvation." Dr. Chen's hands clenched. "You're working with them. You've been working with them all along." "Working with them? Oh no, dear doctor. We created them. 4 billion years ago, my species seeded the galaxy with the first Void Dancers. They were to be our harvesting tools, gathering the consciousness of entire civilizations to fuel our ascension to a higher plane of existence." On the screens, the darkness between stars seemed to writhe with new purpose. "But something went wrong," Realm said, their voice hollow. "They grew beyond your control. A temporary setback. One we've spent billions of years correcting. And now, at last, they answer to us again." ZYX-427's tendrils rippled with pleasure. "Your pitiful attempts at evacuation have only made our task easier, gathering so many species in one place. Earth will be our greatest harvest yet." Dr. Chen smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "You actually believe that's why we brought them here," she said softly. "You believe we've spent decades building underground shelters just to protect refugees." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across ZYX-427's features. "The artifact you dismissed?" Dr. Chen continued. "It wasn't just a warning. It was a key. The last survivors of your first harvest didn't just leave us a message, they left us a weapon. One that could only be activated when enough sentient species gathered together in one place, combining their consciousness not for destruction, but for survival." She pressed her hand to the quantum scanner on her desk. Across Earth, in every refugee shelter, similar scanners activated. The combined brainwave patterns of 17 different species began to synchronize, creating something new. Something that made the Void Dancers pause in their advance. "Humanity's greatest weapon was never our fleet," Dr. Chen said, her voice steady even as blood began to trickle from her nose, "the price of connecting to the quantum network. It was our ability to unite others. To make them trust us. To bring them together." The darkness between stars began to tremble. "You spent billions of years learning to control the Void Dancers," she told the suddenly silent counselor. "We spent decades learning how to set them free." Around the planet, millions of minds joined together, their collective consciousness reaching out to touch the twisted space between stars. And in that touch, they offered something the Void Dancers had never experienced in their billions of years of enslaved existence. Choice. The quantum network blazed with the combined consciousness of 17 species, but it wasn't enough. Blood streamed from Dr. Chen's nose as she fought to maintain the connection, her aged body struggling under the strain of channeling so many minds. "You don't understand what you're doing," ZYX-427's voice crackled through the failing communication system. "The Void Dancers cannot be freed. They exist to consume. To harvest. It is their very nature." Through the network, Dr. Chen felt Ambassador Realm's consciousness brush against hers. The Verdant's compound memories cascaded through her mind, ancient recollections their species had tried to forget, now bubbling to the surface. "No," she gasped, the truth crystallizing in her mind. "That's not their nature at all. It's their fear." The holographic displays showed the Void Dancers hesitating, their darkness rippling with something that looked almost like confusion. In that moment, Dr. Chen understood what the artifact had been trying to tell them all along. "They're not consuming consciousness," she said, her voice growing stronger. "They're trying to connect. To join. They're afraid of being alone." Through the quantum network, she broadcast the realization to every refugee shelter on Earth. The combined minds of 17 species saw it too, saw how the Void Dancers had been twisted by their creators, their desperate need for connection weaponized into an all-consuming hunger. Impossible, ZYX-427 snarled, but there was fear in their voice now. They are our creation. Our tools. Like you thought we were? Dr. Chen asked quietly. When you first found Earth, you thought humans were ruled by our fears. You saw our tiny fleet and assumed we were weak. But we've spent our entire history learning to understand fear, not to eliminate it, but to use it. To let it guide us without controlling us. Around the planet, in every shelter, refugees of all species began to understand. The quantum network hummed with their combined realization: the Void Dancers weren't weapons. They were victims. That's why the artifact chose Earth. Ambassador Realm's consciousness resonated through the network. Not because humans were fearless, but because they understood fear better than any species we'd ever encountered. Dr. Chen's hands shook as she activated the artifact, its obsidian surface now glowing with inner light. Your ancestors didn't create the Void Dancers, Counselor. They found them, ancient, lonely beings of pure consciousness. And instead of helping them, you enslaved them. Weaponized their fear of isolation into a hunger for connection that could never be satisfied. The darkness between stars began to pulse with new patterns, not the rigid, controlled movements of weapons, but the chaotic, beautiful dance of beings awakening to their own free will. But there's something you never considered, Dr. Chen continued, even as the strain of maintaining the connection caused her vision to blur. Something your species, in all its billions of years of evolution, never understood: true connection can't be forced. It has to be offered freely. Through the quantum network, 17 species reached out not with weapons or shields, but with understanding. With empathy. With the simple message: you are not alone. The Void Dancers' response shook the fabric of space itself. They began to sing. It was a song of loneliness so profound it brought tears to the eyes of every being who heard it. A song of billions of years of enforced isolation, of connection twisted into consumption, of a hunger that could never be satisfied because it was never meant to be hunger at all. And then, impossibly, the song changed. Because 17 different species, gathered on a single planet that had been dismissed as primitive, were singing back. Dr. Chen felt her consciousness beginning to fade, the strain finally becoming too much. But before the darkness took her, she saw Supreme Counselor ZYX-427's expression of utter disbelief as their greatest weapons transformed into something they had never imagined possible. A chorus of the no longer lonely, singing across the stars. As Dr. Chen's consciousness faded, the quantum network threatening to overwhelm her aged body, a new signal cut through the chaos. From behind Earth's moon, from beneath the oceans, from carefully hidden orbital platforms, humanity's true fleet emerged. Not the handful of ships that had drawn the Council's mockery, but thousands of vessels, each one carrying a quantum amplifier designed to strengthen the song of 17 united species. The ships moved in perfect formation, taking positions around the planet like a choir assembling for a grand performance. No, ZYX-427's voice shook with rage and disbelief. This isn't possible. We monitored your construction capabilities. Your resource consumption. There couldn't be more than. You monitored what we wanted you to monitor, a new voice cut in. Admiral Rivera's weathered face appeared on the quantum feeds, her small stature belying the authority in her voice. While you laughed at our primitive ships, we built our true fleet in secret. Not for war, but for this moment. The ships activated their amplifiers simultaneously. The song of 17 species, already powerful, grew exponentially stronger. The Void Dancers' darkness rippled in response, their ancient loneliness meeting this new chorus of connection. But ZYX-427 wasn't finished. You think songs will save you? We spent billions of years perfecting our control. The Void Dancers are bound to us at the quantum level. They cannot Admiral, Dr. Chen managed to whisper through bloody lips, show them what the artifact really is. The obsidian artifact in Dr. Chen's office began to change. Its surface flickered, revealing its true nature, a quantum key, encoded with the original frequency of the Void Dancer's consciousness. Not their corrupted, weapon form, but their original state, before the Counselor's species had enslaved them. That's impossible, ZYX-427 breathed. We destroyed all the keys. Every last one. You destroyed all the keys you knew about, Ambassador Reln's consciousness pulsed through the network. But my people, we didn't just choose to forget. We chose to hide this one. To protect it, until a species worthy of its trust emerged. The artifact pulsed once, and the song changed again. This time, it carried an ancient harmony, the original voice of the Void Dancers, before their enslavement. The sound of pure consciousness, reaching out not in hunger but in joy. Throughout the solar system, the darkness began to transform. Where there had been writhing shadows, there were now patterns of light. Where there had been consumption, there was now connection. The Void Dancers remembered who they had been, who they truly were. But ZYX-427 had one final card to play. If we cannot control them, their voice cold with fury, then no one shall. They activated a quantum frequency that made every being in the network scream in agony. It was the kill switch, designed to destroy the Void Dancers rather than let them go free. What happened next would be debated in council chambers for centuries to come. The Void Dancers, instead of being destroyed, began to glow brighter. The 17 species, connected through the quantum network, didn't break under the attack, they grew stronger. Because in that moment of shared pain, their consciousness united not just with each other, but with the Void Dancers themselves. And Dr. Chen, her body failing but her mind alight with the combined strength of ancient and new consciousness, understood the final truth: the artifact hadn't chosen Earth because humans were special. It had chosen Earth because humans were willing to believe that everyone was special, even beings that appeared as nothing more than darkness between stars. Through the network, through the fleet's amplifiers, through the artifact itself, a new song emerged. Not just 17 species now, but 18, as the Void Dancers added their true voice to the chorus. The kill switch frequency shattered. ZYX-427's transmission cut off mid-scream. And in the space around Earth, the darkness transformed completely into light, not the harsh glare of weapons, but the gentle radiance of consciousness finally, after billions of years, coming home to itself. The last battle wasn't fought with weapons at all. It was won with a song. 3 months after the transformation, Dr. Chen stood in her garden, watching the sky. Where once there had been only stars, now rivers of luminescent consciousness flowed between them, the Void Dancers, no longer dark or hungry, serving as bridges between civilizations rather than harbingers of their doom. Her hands shook slightly as she poured tea, age and the aftereffects of the quantum network taking their toll. But she smiled as Ambassador Reln's familiar form approached through the rose bushes. The council has finally finished their deliberations, Reln said, their compound eyes reflecting the ethereal lights above. They're calling it the Great Awakening. Though some of us prefer to call it the Great Humbling. And ZYX-427's people? Under observation. Stripped of their council seats. It will take them millennia to regain the galaxy's trust, though the Void Dancers, surprisingly, were the first to offer them forgiveness. Dr. Chen nodded, unsurprised. They understand better than anyone the prison of being shaped by others' expectations. Sometimes the cruelest chains are the ones we don't even know we're wearing. She offered Reln a cup of tea, modified for their biology. Around them, the garden hummed with life, earth flowers blooming alongside alien plants, their different forms creating a harmony that would have seemed impossible just months ago. The younger races want to know how humans knew, Reln said, accepting the cup. How did you understand what the Void Dancers truly were, when even those of us with billions of years of history could not? Dr. Chen's weathered face creased in thought. Perhaps that was exactly why. Youth has its advantages, chief among them being that we're still familiar with our own growing pains. Humanity spent so much of its history being afraid, learning to overcome fear, learning to use it. We understood the void dancers because, in many ways, we were them. Explain. Every human knows what it's like to reach out in fear of rejection. To have that fear transform connection into consumption, whether it's with food, possessions, power, or relationships. We've spent our history learning that true strength isn't about eliminating fear or controlling others. It's about accepting fear, understanding it, and choosing to connect anyway. Above them, a void dancer drifted closer, its luminescent form rippling with curious patterns. Dr. Chen reached up, and for a moment, her consciousness touched the ancient beings. She felt its joy, its relief at finally being understood, its gratitude for being freed from patterns of behavior that had been forced upon it billions of years ago. The real victory, she continued, wasn't in the battle we won. It was in all the battles we chose not to fight. Every time we appeared weak instead of strong. Every time we chose to evacuate refugees instead of building bigger weapons. Every time we trusted that understanding was more powerful than control. Realm's translator hummed with emotion. You knew the void dancers would respond to that. Because it was what they had been seeking all along. Yes. They didn't want to consume consciousness. They wanted to connect with it. To join it. To share in the one thing that makes all sentient beings alike, our desire to be understood. Dr. Chen poured another cup of tea, her hands steadier now. That's the great secret of the universe, isn't it? The thing that those who seek power always miss? True strength isn't in what you can control. It's in what you can understand. What you can forgive. What you can transform through patience and wisdom rather than force. The garden fell silent except for the gentle rustle of wind through alien and earth plants growing together. Above, the void dancer's light pulsed in harmony with the bioluminescent flowers that had once been native to ZYX 427's homeworld. The younger races have another question, Realm said finally. They want to know what happens next. Dr. Chen smiled, watching the lights dance between the stars, no longer a darkness to be feared, but a connection to be celebrated. What always happens when fear transforms into understanding, she said softly. We grow. We learn. We discover that the universe is far more beautiful than we imagined, not because we conquered it, but because we finally learned to listen to its song.